Hi, I'm Gena, and today we're going to be building a schedulable reporting workflow. We'll start with an Excel workbook, which will then parse into a dataset using Pipeline Builder. Then we'll construct a report using Contour and Notepad. And finally, we'll send it on a schedule using Automate. Let's get started. Let's say that we're starting with this Excel workbook. Here, we have a dataset of work orders pertaining to our theme park rides. Now, notice that in this Excel workbook, we have a couple extra leading lines at the top. We also might have multiple tabs. We might have some extra visualizations. And we're going to be taking this workbook and parsing it using Pipeline Builder. So now let's get started on that. Starting anywhere from Foundry, you can type Control-J to open up the search. Now, search for Pipeline Builder. Now, create a new pipeline. And we're going to call this one Parse Excel Workbook. Make sure the type is a batch pipeline. And select the location. We're going to save it in our Excel to Automate folder. And then hit Save. And then hit Create Pipeline. So normally what we would do in Pipeline Builder is click Add Foundry Data. But this time, we're going to be dragging and dropping from our computer. So you can drag the file, drop it right in here, and make sure you hit Upload to a dataset without a schema. So hit that third option, and then hit Upload. Now that the upload is finished, we'll hit Done. And now we've uploaded our Excel workbook. And so the first thing that you're going to do is click on your node and hit Transform. And notice that you have a more limited selection of options for transformation, given that you're starting with an Excel workbook. So to start, we're going to search for Excel and hit Extract Rows from an Excel file. Now, to make things easier for ourselves, we have the option to paste an Excel header row and use that to auto-generate the schema. And so we'll go back to our spreadsheet, copy that first row, click here, and then paste in those column names and hit Generate Schema. Now, next up, we can see that we have 4 header rows, and so we'll hit Rows to Skip as 4. Next up, you have the option to create a column in your resulting dataset that contains the file name. We're going to skip that one. You also have the option to store the sheet name that the data came from in another column. Lastly, it's important that if you don't want to pull data from all of your sheets, you should specify what the source sheet is. Now, what this is going to do is include sheets based on a substring that you put in. And so for us, we know that that would be work orders, because that's the name of the sheet that has our data in it. If you don't specify this, it will include all of the data from all of the sheets. So here we'll put work orders. And then everything else looks okay here, but make sure that for treat first row after skipping as header, you have this set to true so that it will keep our column names. So we'll set that to true and then hit Apply. And so now that this is run, let's take a look at our results. And everything looks good. It looks like we have the columns that we should have. Now note here that you might need to cast some of these columns to a different type. So for example, the cost came in as a string, but is clearly a number. Similarly, number of parts needed is also a string, but it should be a number. We have some dates that came in as strings, and so we're going to need to fix those as well. To do that, we're going to use the cast operation in Pipeline Builder. So hit Search Transforms and Columns, and search for Cast. Hit Cast. And the first column that we're going to convert is cost. We'll set the type to be a double, and hit Apply. So that's the process for casting one column to another type. But we have a lot of columns to take care of. So instead, we're going to use the Apply to Multiple Columns operation to do this to multiple columns at once. So search for multiple, and you will see Apply to Multiple Columns. So we use this transform to take an operation and apply it to multiple columns. This works like a for loop does in code. So first we'll take care of all of the dates. So we set the condition for each column that matches the condition. Column is one of. And we'll take the date column, date task started, date ended, date back online, And that will take care of all of our date columns. Now, next up, we're going to apply an expression. So we're going to click in the box, and the expression that we're going to apply is cast. So we're going to hit cast and cast all of the columns that meet the criteria, which are held in this variable, to a date. Now, note that for these, we won't need to set a specific format, but if you're working with different data, you might have to. And the way that we have this set up is automatically going to keep the name of the columns the same. So we'll hit apply. And now we can verify that these columns are now dates and the format looks correct. Next up, we're going to cast all of our numbers to numbers. So once again, we're going to search for multiple, select apply to multiple columns. And in this case, we're going to check that column is one of, and we'll select all of the columns that should be numeric. Now, cost, we already converted to a double. But for example, we'll need to set num parts needed to a double. Days to resolution, days of downtime, revenue lost. And that will cover all of the columns that we need to convert to doubles. And for the expression, we will search for cast once again. And we'll be casting the columns that are held in the column variable. And the type will be a double. And then we'll click apply. And now we can see that those columns are now doubles. So let's take a final look at our data to make sure that all the types look correct. And then we can continue onward. So now that we've uploaded our data and the types are correct, we can output it as a dataset. Make sure all of your changes are applied, and then go back to the graph. From here, you'll click on that node, go to Add Output, and we're going to add a new dataset. So let's call this one Work Orders Data. Now everything looks right here, so we'll hit Save, and then we'll deploy it to build the dataset, and then hit Deploy again. So now that our deployment has succeeded, we can go look at our data. And so if we right-click on the data and hit Open, and now we can see a larger view of this data. The next step is to create some visualizations that we can use in a report. We're going to do this using Contour. To get there, you can hit Analyze Contour right at the top. So we'll hit Analyze Contour, and here we are in our empty contour. Note that at the bottom, we can see a preview of our data, and it can be helpful to keep this open as we build. The first thing that we're going to put in here is a pivot table. So we'll go to Find a Board, search for Pivot, click on Pivot Table. And for the rows, let's look at Work Order Type and Mechanic. So we're going to skip columns here, and for the aggregates, we're going to look at the average days of downtime. Change this to mean, and then hit Compute. And now at this point, we might want to change the names of our columns to make them better formatted. Work Order Type, change this one, capitalize this one. And then we can change this to average days downtime. Perhaps we can add another aggregate here, such as cost. So we can search for cost here. And let's do the sum. So we'll hit Recompute. And let's also update the column name here. And since we're working with a dollar amount here, let's go ahead and format the cells to show this as a dollar. So we'll hit Format Cells and go to Sum of Cost and display this in US dollars. So then we'll hit Compute. And now we have our pivot table. Now next up, let's make a chart. So we'll hit Find a Board and search for Chart. And for our next chart, let's make a timeline of when these work orders are happening and segment it out by park section. So for the x-axis, we will look at date. And note that we can display the exact date, or we can bump this up to something like month. For the y-axis, we'll keep it to row count. And we will segment it by park section. And then hit Compute and Save. And now we have a stacked bar chart that shows us the count of work orders per month per park section. Finally, let's add a couple of high-level metrics to display at the top of our report. So we'll go to Find a Board, search for Calculation. And so for this first metric, let's look at the average days to resolution. So for the column, we'll hit Days to Resolution. And for the aggregate, we'll take the mean and then hit Compute. And let's add some rounding on this one. So let's round to 0 decimal places. No special formatting needed. But note that if we wanted to, we could add some conditional formatting. But we should add a better title, so we'll just call this Average Days to Resolution. And next up, let's add another metric on here. So we'll hit Add Calculation. And let's take the average days of downtime. So hit Days of Downtime. The aggregate is the mean. And we will call this Average Days of Downtime. We'll hit Compute. And we might also want to round this one down to 0 decimal places. Let's add one more metric here. So we'll hit Add Calculation. And the column will be cost. So we'll look at the total cost over all of these work orders. So the aggregate will be sum. And for the labels, let's call this total cost of all work orders. And then we'll hit Compute. And for the special formatting, we're going to make this into US dollars and also round this to 0. And now let's make sure the formatting is what we want. So we'll go to Format. And note that we can change the layout style for these metrics. So for example, right now it's a card. We could also make this a list. But we'll keep it as a card for now. You can also change the size of the metrics. You can make them large or compact. Let's set them to being compact. And now we've created a couple of visualizations that we can put into our Notepad. To do that, we're going to need to make a Notepad. So make sure you first save your contour. And then hit Save. And then hit Control-J and search for Notepad. Now open that up in another tab. And we're going to hit New Document and call this one Work Orders Report. And then hit Save. And now we're going to insert the boards from our contour analysis. We'll type a / and go to Contour Chart, hit Insert, select our contour analysis, your borders analysis, hit Select. We'll select the specific path, which is work orders data. And for the first board that we'll add, let's add the calculations. And so here we have these high-level metrics to go at the top of our report. The other way that we can add widgets from Contour is we can just go back to our contour analysis, go to the upper 3 dots, and hit Copy for Notepad. And then paste that right in. Now let's go add our pivot table. And now we've created our Notepad report. So now that we've created our Notepad report, it's time to send it on a schedule using Automate. To do that, we'll go to Actions, Add Automation, hit New Automation, and we're going to go through the steps to configure our automation. An automation is composed of conditions and effects. The simplest condition would be, say, time. So every week on Friday, I send out this report. Your conditions in Automate can also be ontology related. So for example, you can have this automation trigger if objects are added to a set or removed from a set, modified, or when a specific metric changed or when a threshold is crossed. So for our trigger, we're going to keep it simple and use a time-based trigger. So we'll hit time, and let's send this weekly only on Fridays. So we'll unselect these other days and send it at 9 a.m. So hit Next. And the second part of an automation is an effect. So since we're setting up this automation from Notepad, the default effect is going to be a plain notification. And so a plain notification is going to be a combination of an email and an in-platform notification. Note that the other effects of an automation can also include an action or a logic function. But for now, we're going to stick with a plain notification. To configure this, we'll hit Edit. And most importantly, we're going to want to configure recipients. Who is our report going to? In this case, I'll have it go to myself. So I'll select my user, but you might want to select a colleague for this. Note also that in certain cases, you can pull your recipients from an object property. So now we're going to configure the content of the message. And so in this case, we're going to use a plain notification, but note that these can also be function generated. So first, let's configure the heading. We'll call this Weekly Work Order Report. And for the message, we'll put, please see this work order report. So this is the heading in the message. Now, when you configure an automation from Notepad, the default is to include the Notepad as an attachment. However, if you want your users to be able to go click on the Notepad and interact with it in Foundry, you're going to have to include a URL link. So to do that, you'll click URL link, give it a label, Notepad report, select the link resource, which will be work orders report. And now this email will include a link to this Notepad. So now we have the advanced email configuration. And the difference between these configurations and the configurations here is that if you don't put any extra configuration here, the in-platform notification and the email will have the same heading and message. However, if you want the in-platform notification and the email to have different content, then you'll want to specify that here. So for example, maybe you want more text in an email. For now, we'll keep them the same. Now, the last thing that we have to do is you have to name this attachment. And so we're just going to keep it simple and call this Work Orders Report. And then hit Next. And now everything's properly configured, and we can hit Next again. And next, we're going to want to set the automation administrators. So for example, if there's a problem with an automation or if it's about to expire, who gets notified? In this case, it's also going to be me. And so then we'll hit Next. And now we have to set a save location because an automation is a Foundry resource. So we'll select the file name and location, call this Work Orders Report, and hit Save. And then we'll hit Create Automation. So here's an important question. What is the point of putting this on a schedule if we have a static upload? Well, let's say that you get emailed an Excel workbook every week. And the schema stays the same, but the data gets updated. Let's go through how to upload that and update your current data. So back in the pipeline builder where you started, you click on your input data set. You can go to import. And then if you get a new file, you can just drag it right in here and then select replace all content with new files and then click next. And now this data will be updated with the latest from our Excel workbook. While we're here, let's also give this data set a readable name. So we'll call this Work Orders Excel Upload. Now, we're not done yet, because ultimately our goal is to have fresh data in our contour and our Notepad. And so to do that, we'll have to make sure that when this data set gets updated, the clean data set that we created also gets updated. To do that, we'll put it on a schedule. So we'll hit Explore Pipeline in the upper right, Explore Data Lineage. Now we have Work Orders Excel Upload in Data Lineage, and we'll click the arrow to show the child data set, which is Work Orders Data, which is the clean data set that we created. Now I'll click on this node, go to the Schedule option in the sidebar, and hit Create New Schedule. In Work Orders Data will be the target, and Work Orders Excel Upload will be the trigger. So whenever I get new data here, Work Orders Data will update as well, which means our analysis and our Notepad will also update. Before you leave, make sure you save your schedule. So in summary, we started in Pipeline Builder, we parsed an Excel workbook, did some cleaning so we can work with it. We produced some visualizations in Contour, put our visualizations into a Notepad report, set up an automation to send the report on schedule, and created a schedule to make sure that we have fresh data every time the raw data gets updated. This concludes our tutorial. Thanks for watching, and be sure to let us know in the comments which tutorials you want to see next.